We're going on 6 years now with the Vermintide series, somehow the 6 longest and shortest years of my life. It's crazy. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, but we've been slaying rats since October 2015, the release date for V1, and in that time, we've met a fantastic cast of characters, visited some really cool locations, and seen the Warhammer Fantasy Universe brought to vivid life in a way that few games have been able to capture. But there's been a clear focus on the Empire and mankind during that span, bit of a myopic look at human civilization, ignoring the other conflicts and major events that have been ravaging the rest of the planet during the end times. And I get why the focus has been on human civilization so far, why the spotlight has been on Uberstrike and Helmgart and the Empire at large, because it's simply easier to fall in love with and connect with human or human-like characters. We naturally empathize and relate to them more. The Uberstrike 5 are a perfect introduction to the Warhammer Fantasy Battle universe, and their story arc is at the core of what makes this series. They can and will continue to be the main focus moving forward. But I also think there's a massive world to explore here, and ignoring it would be a huge missed opportunity. It's time we see some new sights and sounds. And let's be honest, nothing was really done with the Chaos Waste to advance the narrative of any of the main characters. The story arc of our protagonist did not progress in any meaningful way. When you beat the Citadel of Eternity at the end of a long expedition, there's no cutscene or continuation of the story that lets us know what the purpose for everything was. What was the point? Why did we go there? What were we doing? I still don't really have any idea. The game didn't do a great job of explaining any of it, so I'm cool to put the Uberstrike 5 story on pause for a while because frankly, it's been on pause for a while now anyway. I strongly suspect their narrative isn't even close to being done yet. In fact, I'd be shocked if we didn't get a Vermintide 3 at some point down the line, a game that will likely continue to focus on Skaven, Chaos, and their invasion of the Empire. But there are dozens of other spectacular locations we could explore in this world that have rarely, if ever, seen the light of day. I want to see some of that now. Don't get me wrong, when it comes to the Chaos Waste, there were quite a few stunning visual elements, but when I see fragments of War Camp, or Hailscourge, or Screaming Bell, elements of maps we've played a million times over at this point, reskinned and rehashed, I long for something new. Truly new. Entirely new. So it's time to get some new blood up in here. Some cold blood. A chance for the Lizardmen to defend their temple cities from the Bubos-encrusted vermin of Clan Pestilens. It won't happen anytime soon, but I think Fat Shark should seriously consider heading to Lustria for a Vermintide 2 expansion. One thing we've kind of missed out on, bathing in the undeniable charm of the old world, traipsing alongside the River Reich and through ravaged imperial cities, are the more exotic elements of Warhammer. The lost hold of Karak Zorn, the magma plains of the Darklands, the glittering shores of Ulthuan, the desert pyramids of the Tomb Kings, and of course, the dinosaur jungles of Lustria. And when it comes to Lustria, I can't think of a more perfect setting for an expansion to Vermintide. For anyone who's read up on the Lizardmen lore, a huge chunk of their origin story and their pantheon revolves around a literal tide of diseased Skaven rising up from below in an attempt to destroy their empire. Sacred plaques of Shakwa foretold of this coming cataclysm, of an endless wave of vermin sweeping aside entire temple cities, and of a great and terrible plague. This was the prophecy of Sotek, the serpent god, and their wars would consume Lustria for the better part of 1,000 years. So there's a long history of bitter, brutal battle between the Lizardmen and Clan Pestilens, and that would come roaring back to the forefront during the end times, when plague monks and Skaven zealots swarmed to the surface world in such ridiculous, all-consuming numbers that the Lizardmen were forced to abandon their empire entirely and sail off into space. Of course, it didn't help that Lord Croak and Lord Mazdamundi burned themselves out of existence, trying to prevent Morslib's destruction from devastating the continent. That battle would take many years to finally complete, to finally get the Lizardmen entirely out of their civilization. So while the Uberstrike 5 are defending Helmgart and the Empire at large, we could have a whole new cast of characters fighting for the Geomantic Web. Imagine a game, just sit here, close your eyes, and think about this. Imagine a game where we play as a merry band of Lizardmen, surrounded by hordes of pox rats, venturing through dark underground grottos, fighting up the steps of a massive temple city, running through tropical jungles with the bellowing of carnosaurs nearby, just taking in all the sights and sounds of a prehistoric jungle. There's a sense of true adventure and wonder there that I haven't felt in Vermintide for a while, with the possible exception of the Citadel of Eternity itself. Because it's a true change of scenery. It's a part of the Warhammer world that's never really been explored. An ancient, mysterious, and wild location that kind of has those Indiana Jones and a Temple of Doom vibes a lot of us grew up with. And it has dinosaurs. Who doesn't love dinosaurs? So here's what I envision when it comes to a Lizardmen vs. Pestilens expansion in Lustria. And I do think an expansion is the way to go here, between $20 and $25, about what we got with Winds of Magic. But hopefully in this case, a little bit better implemented. I'd like to see 3 to 5 new adventure maps set in and around a Lizardmen Temple City. Amazing opportunity here to see some of the most closely guarded secrets and most mysterious locations in the entirety of the Warhammer Fantasy setting. The Star Chambers of the Slann, the spawning pools deep below the earth where the Lizardmen replenish their numbers, the predatory jungles themselves teeming with wildlife and enemies. In the original Siege of Shakwa, one of Clan Pestilens' first moves was to infect the spawning pools that would allow the Lizardmen to reinforce their armies. And what happened here was that it caused anything birthed in those pools to come out a shriveled, desiccated husk. So we'd have a mission dedicated solely to defending the spawning pools, preventing plague monks from desecrating those waters. Maybe another expedition into the jungle to destroy besieging plague claw catapults, where we see glimpses of that massive temple city sprawling from behind the trees, and volcanoes exploding in the background, dinosaurs roaring far away, and then a fight through the temple city itself, through cramped corridors, yawning atriums, across narrow causeways, to the gates of the Star Chamber itself, to give the Slann the time they need to cripple this invasion. If Fat Shark wanted to get some more bang for their buck here, I could see them transferring these missions to the base game as well, to allow Barden, Victor, Sienna, Marcus, and Carillion to take part as well. But the Uberstrike 5 would not be the stars of this particular show. We'd have a whole new cast of characters, and the brilliant thing about the Lizardmen is that they don't need a whole lot of personifying. In fact, they don't need much in the way of voice acting or writing at all, which cuts down on costs pretty substantially, which is attractive for an expansion like this one. I mean, don't get me wrong, the voice actors and writing for Vermintide are incredible. They're hilarious, they're endearing, they do a lot for the game, but those elements take a lot of time, effort, and energy to put together. The advantage the Lizardmen bring to the table is that they don't need much voice acting at all. Saurus and Temple Guard mostly just grunt and roar. Croxagors, same thing for them as well. Really, only skinks formulate entire sentences, and you could keep that to a healthy minimum in an expansion like this. No one is buying Vermintide Dinosaur Country to hear lizard people talk. At the end of the day, we just don't need that much exposition. So I'm definitely feeling like 5 playable Lizardmen characters is the way to go, but I don't think a fully fleshed out class system would be realistic in terms of each of the 5 characters getting 3 unique classes like we have in the base game. When we start getting into that kind of territory, with 15 unique skill trees and ultimates and the like, that's approaching full game price point status, which isn't realistic with Darktide on the way. So 5 new characters, 1 class for each. And there's a multitude of routes we could go down here, so feel free to share your input down below, but I'm thinking a Scarvet War Leader, a Temple Guard, a Skink Priest, a Chameleon Skink, and a Croxagor as our Lustria 5. The Scarvet would be our group leader. Strong, fast, deadly, and well-rounded. He has survived centuries of battle against all manner of demonic and vermin threat. Equipped with a minor Old One's artifact in his left hand, perhaps less powerful version of Krotgar's Golden Gauntlet, that allows him to fire beams of energy and rip and tear with one hand, while in the other, he wields a massive war club or obsidian spear. A Temple Guard would be our second class, a more defensive-oriented character with powerful buffs for nearby allies, very tanky, and fighting in a more regimented, controlled style. Chameleon Skinks would of course be focused on ranged combat, utilizing damage over time poison blowpipes and javelins for taking down specials, stealthing behind enemy lines for backstab damage, and filling that rogue archetype for this group, while a Skink Priest would be focused on a magical deluge, destroying hordes with wave clear and augmenting allies with Barona's Time Warp for attack and movement speed. And of course, the Croxagor would be our lovable dumb brute, standing nearly twice as tall as a Saurus warrior. Slow moving, yet extremely powerful and with tons of armor-piercing options, wielding a massive two-handed club for wave clear, or a Sacred Croxagor Power Fist for better single-target DPS. It wouldn't be a truly massive collection of new weapons, as Maquedal war clubs with edges carved from obsidian, spears, shields, blowpipes, power fists, and maybe a handful of Old One's artifacts would make up pretty much the entire list, but there's a lot of opportunity to experiment there with animations, form, and function, especially when it comes to the ancient weaponry left behind by the Star Toads. There's a lot you could experiment with there. From the Pestilens side, there'd actually be a lot less work to worry about. because the framework for the Skaven is obviously already there. You can keep all the same exact specials, Packmasters, Gas Rats, Warp Fire Throwers, Rattling Gunners, all that. Maybe just give them a touch-up that demonstrates they've been hanging out in the muck and filth with Skrulk and the boys. So make them look a little bit diseased, a little bit decayed, but overall they'd be the same enemies we know and love. All the regular and special enemy types can be carried over pretty much one-to-one, just maybe with a new coat of paint and a new mechanic or two that demonstrates this is varsity Clan Pestilens and not the JV team in Clan Fester. Thinking maybe some poison weapons that damage over time, but nothing too crazy that differentiates them that much. And of course, the Clan and Slave Rats of Pestilens would have a very different vibe, if not a very different playstyle. They'd have a creepier vibe here. Glowing green eyes, filthy armor, buboes encrusted skin, and plenty of noxious fumes to go around. On the other hand, Plague Zealot Sensor Bearers would be an obvious inclusion, enemies that leave a cloud of poison when their weapons make contact with yours. They'd have a slow, reactable, but unblockable attack that could wrap around your shields, as you'd expect a Plague Sensor would be able to do with that flexible weapon, and maybe a single new boss type like a Brood Horror that skitters faster than the other bosses, has regeneration and vomits acid, but is less survivable than something like a Rat Ogre. I frankly always wanted to see an A-Bomb make an appearance in Vermintide as well, but a Hellpit Abomination of that caliber might be a bit outside the budget after all these other additions, so not sure how realistic that would be. And yeah, this is absolutely a big departure from anything we've gotten in the realm of Warhammer Fantasy games before, with the obvious exception of Total War, but that's a very different animal. It's a different way of fleshing out the universe, and I could see why a dev might be hesitant to pursue something like this, but at the same time, I'm not buying for a second that a Lustria expansion would not sell well. Advanced space laser dinosaurs fighting waves of vermin in a sprawling Mesoamerican civilization, in steaming jungles, and all that color, all that wonder, looking at things we've never been able to see up close and personal before. You don't have to be a Warhammer fan to love the sound of that. People love dinosaurs, they love Vermintide, they like the combat that made this series famous. It sounds niche on paper, but I'd argue it's really not. Any big Twitch streamer who's ever played or heard of Left 4 Dead would want to give this a shot, and all it takes nowadays is some buzz on Twitch and YouTube for a game to completely take off. I think it's a perfect setting. You don't have to worry much about voice acting or writing or a story. You just need to make an atmospheric, beautiful temple city with some big, brawny lizard people and keep on keeping on with that satisfying, visceral melee combat, and people will be all over it. I think at some point, Vermintide should give the Uberstrike 5 a break and bust into something completely new, exotic, and fresh. And Lustria, Clan Pestilens, and the Lizardmen represent a perfect opportunity to do so.